that to me is a big purpose of connecting people, connecting oneself, like tapping into something bigger than just this individual thing.
Welcome back to the 10,000 Heroes Show. I am Ankur Shah Delight, and this is a podcast about purpose. My purpose, your purpose, our guest's purpose, purpose all the way down. We're all here somewhere along the journey of purpose. Some of us are farther along in terms of our knowledge or knowing it or living it. Some of us are more aware of it than others. But purpose, I contend, is fundamentally inescapable. So what I like to do through these interviews is demystify purpose to make it more accessible. So there's less of a burden of heaviness about living up to our potential and more of a playfulness of how we express ourselves. And our guest today is perfect for that. Her name is Edie Pjipers. I met Edie 9 years ago in my mom's backyard. I was organizing a cob workshop at the time, a cob building workshop. And Edie signed up at the last minute and flew all the way across the country from New York. I had no idea that day what an incredible person Edie was, or what an amazing artist she was. But it didn't take me long to figure it out, and it won't take you long either, I'm guessing. So let's jump in.
So this podcast, it's called 10,000 Heroes, and it's about heroism, but heroism in a different way than people normally think of it. And my definition of heroism is someone living to their full potential. So that means they've understood kind of why they're here, what their purpose is. They've been able to imagine what it looks like to fully express that. And then they're doing kind of the daily work of being persistent about bringing that into the world. So one of the reasons I reached out to you is I've loved seeing all of the different things you've created over the years. Because you've kind of been an artist in many different ways. You know, I've seen music and painting and books. And so I just wanted to talk to you about this idea of heroism and purpose. So maybe we can just start with, where do you see yourself in that journey?
Well, with purpose, I see myself in alignment with that idea, because I feel that I am doing the thing that I feel I'm supposed to be doing, even though I always feel like there's new, iterations of that, like always sort of waiting to happen and come in. And like you said, I have several media that I work within. So it's like painting one day, and then I might do some music, and I do these animations as well, like little videos or books, or so however it comes. But like the act of creating sort of artistically for me feels like, a very purposeful and a rich way to be spending my days. And I'm like, I feel super blessed to be able to do that. And to put most of my focus on that.
Yeah. And do you have a way that you talk to yourself or you tell yourself a story about that? Do you have a purpose statement? How do you engage with that on a daily basis?
Well, it's changed over time, because I think I used to be more, I'll take it sort of in terms of, because I'm super interested in these ideas right now. It's this the yin and the yang. And so, and which I also see as sort of the masculine and the feminine energies. And I used to be, and still am, like very, like I think a lot of us, most of us, a bit trapped sometimes in the yang energy and the masculine thing of like, go, 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 and achieve and keep yourself busy and sort of pushing that, even if it doesn't feel right. And I find that over the last 10 years or so, I've really found and am consciously working on finding this balance between that energy and the yin energy of just really just allowing and being, and in a more sort of, holistic or circular way, and not being so driven to get from A to B, but more just to be, and then to kind of allow what KLM comes up or Z, and to jump around a bit and to catch whatever feels like the next right wave, and to trust that. And within art, that's a super important or sort of prominent thing, because I feel like a painting is participating in that, in these two energies, and letting those intertwine, and sort of like at some point you have to direct yourself and be like, step into that space of like, all right, I'm going to really work up this detail now and use my logic and use my precision and all these kind of what I see as the more masculine qualities. But then you have to also throw all of that out and just bring a big splash of color somewhere just because it feels right and see what happens, or destroy it all again in a way, which is kind of going with that flow, which is more of that feminine thing. So coming back to what you were asking, if I have a purpose statement or anything like that, I feel like it has changed to where now where I may have been more linear in that way of like, I gotta, always be producing. Maybe now I'm more like, I gotta be in my purpose. And even if that means, making a really nice lunch or taking a moment to do something else. I'm a mother now too, which is, a very different role to fulfill on a daily basis and be in. And it helped me a lot to also, I feel, come into that space more and more. But yeah, I tap into it through listening to myself, my insides, my like what is it that wants to be expressed right now or not, and then trying and then going with that, and then trusting that the next thing will show up, if you will.
So, what are you trying to do, if anything, with your art?
With my art, I try to offer connection. I try to bring something of beauty into the world simply, like in a very simple way. I think what it does to me is it makes me feel that we're connected. Like we're not alone. Like, oh, you feel that too, or oh, you see that too, or oh, like, and art has such a beautiful way of presenting that, because it's in a way it's playful, it's art. It's even if it's a dark piece, like it's sort of like people have wrestled with it and played with it and expressed it, and then for the viewer, the listener, to take it in and feel somehow that, oh, you too, then that to me is a big purpose of connecting people, connecting oneself, like tapping into something bigger than just this individual thing.
Yeah. I was actually did an interview for another podcast this morning that was about purpose-driven entrepreneurship. We were trying to untangle why so many people do things that are not purpose-driven, or just feeling like a little bit alienated. And I one of my hypotheses is that it's kind of a lack of imagination, or a sense, that we get from society that we can't do both. We can't both satisfy the needs of other people, which is engaging in the economy, and satisfy our own needs. But what I hear from you saying is like what you're doing with the art really is both at the same time.
Yeah, like I'm also I hear you say something that like made me think of like, satisfying or like blending things together that are seemingly oppositional, or like, how like there's been this trend, I think, for a long time now, like that if science and say like spiritualism couldn't like go hand in hand, but for me stuff like that, it's like, no, we have to see that all these things can coexist. And I think, yeah, within arts, definitely. And there's so many purposes to one piece of art, like, because there's as many purposes as however many people are going to take it in. It's a deeply personal relationship. Actually, I feel like it's about relating. Like it's about, if I see a painting as it's me and the painting that are relating at that moment, and the artist is almost not even, I mean, it's like, yeah, they're they're part of it, but it's like the lineage, it's like the mother or the father, like, or the ancestor if it's older, like, so it doesn't even matter in a way so much what the creator intended as what the piece becomes in the eyes of, or in the heart of, or the brain of the viewer.
And when you create, is there an intention of what it would become or how someone would react or be changed by it? Or is it just there to play whatever role it will and that you have no knowledge of or desire about? Or
Yes, sometimes that and sometimes the other. Like sometimes there's a very clear intention and reason and idea, and it maybe again comes a bit more from that sort of yang space almost like, oh, I have this idea and I want to portray it into the art. And then I think of how I could do it. And other times it's literally a translation of a vision, something very abstract almost, but very real at the same time.
yeah. So I'm thinking, a few years ago, you came out with these books, this series of books on meditation for kids. Would that be, yeah, say it again?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness, yeah. So would that be an example of the more yang approach?
Exactly. And within that process, though, there will be these other moments, like the idea of making these books. I did it with my partner, and we made 7 books. So it was, and then we sat down and we're like, well, what are going to be these 7 books? Like we had one of them, and then one of the books, the process is so intertwined all the time. What I think I like so much about art, and also the analogy of art with life, that you can't ever separate one from the other, or like the process, the yang process from the yin process, like they have to be like doing this. That's why there's the little white dot within the black and the black dot within the white. Like it has to embrace all of it. But yes, to answer the question in a more sort of concrete way, that's going like, oh, here's an idea, and then we'll do this, and then we'll go there.
And what's an example of a piece of art that embodies the other way?
Example of the other is when I do meditate, and I sit in the meditation, and I'll allow, or like sort of, sometimes I'll sort of call out for it, like a little bit in my mind, like, or to say like, oh, the images are welcome, or like the vision's welcome, and sometimes it literally just grabs me, like not an idea, a picture or a vision or a feeling will come, and that could be like, I have the painting in front of me here, and that's what happened with this one, and I painted a woman and a chrysalis, and this, I was lying in bed, and I was just sort of like, calming down from the day, and like there was all of a sudden, I had an intense and beautiful meeting that night with some women friends that we come together with every full moon, and so I was lying there, and I felt it's gonna sound,
Let it sound how it sounds.
let it sound what it sounds like. This all lasted one split second, but I felt like I was a butterfly inside of a cocoon, starting to move around, like almost like starting to get ready. And this was, yeah, again, it just was a realization or feeling or whatever it was, experience of a split second. And then, but it was very real. And then, I was like, wow, all right, beautiful. And then I saw this image too of like, oh, the chrysalis and the state of being in this cocoon, and where I am at that very moment. And then the next day, or the day after, probably the next day, I usually kind of work daily. So then I painted that, and I didn't know how I was going to paint it. And those are those moments where it's just about like, I'm just going to take the paint, start with color, let the color sort of blend into what it blends into, make some shapes. I mean, I have an idea. If I want to paint a chrysalis, I want to paint a woman, but that was it. And then sometime in the process, there was a lot of green in this painting. I thought, oh, I really feel roses, like the idea of roses came up. And again, I don't know, I have a rose bush in my garden. It may just have been that I saw them a lot. And then I stepped away from my painting for a little bit. I went upstairs, and my partner was doing yard work, and he had to cut 3 little roses and put them right by the painting. And I came down and I was like, okay, I have to put roses in this painting. And that's that magical process of that I could never will into being. Like that's just where it's all surrender and going with it and seeing it, noticing it, right? Like being open to it. And so it's, to me, that's like where, I live for that stuff. Like, and that's the joy. That's the pure joy of it.
Oh yeah, that's the best. So I asked that question to get an example of this way of creation, but you answered it with this story about this vision, how the vision became the painting, and of course the interaction with your environment, your husband, the roses. But I'm really drawn to that. I'm curious about that vision. Do you see yourself in that moment as you're this butterfly breaking out of the chrysalis? So what is that? What's that cocoon been for you?
Well, becoming or daring to be more of me. What does that mean? Like more and more allowing myself to trust myself, that I don't need to be approved by others in order to be valid, even though, not to some extreme. I mean, I live in community. I live with my family. I'm not saying that in a way of like, I don't care what anyone thinks of me, but like to not censor myself in ways that are not healthy for me. Feel that cocoon is this ongoing process of becoming kind of what you opened with, I feel, earlier on, of when, like what you saw as the hero, walking in purpose and knowing what that is, and every day, honoring that, or working with that, towards that. And then I feel like there's always all these aspects of the self that I have, that I want to, that come from old stuff, right? Old wounds and all these things that like I'm looking at and I'm seeing, and I'm like, oh, I do this because maybe, this or this happened, and now I got a bit scared that, if I don't have such and such reaction, somebody won't like me, or, this might happen, or they might think or say this or that. And so working with all that, and I feel like the cocoon thing, or like feeling like I'm moving in there, like sort of ready to come out of it more, feels really relevant to fully embrace myself, also with all the flaws, with all the.
Yeah, no, it's just seems so clear to me in this moment. Any amount of looking for external approval or external satisfaction is just incompatible with being guided by the sense of inner potential. That it's almost like at any given moment you can do one or the other. And your metaphor of the cocoon is it's so fascinating, because when I hear you talk about like, oh, external approval, wanting to do my own thing, be myself, feel a sense of acceptance, I see the cocoon as a cage. But in the story of the caterpillar, the cocoon is it's a positive thing, right? It's like it's a safe space.
Yes, and this is what was very or real for me and essential in the story as well, is that for the first time I saw that, and I felt that, and I honored it by painting it and shining a light on that, because I'm always painting, like, the imagery very like happy and light, and maybe if I paint people, or they have their arms open, and this painting, the woman is like this, and I was like, but this is important, that I fully, see the beauty of this stage of life, like where the cocoon stage, like how incredible, and in some way that the child inside the belly is, like in many ways, it's that. So it's like this period of waiting, of growth, of like slowly getting all the information and everything ready for you to come up and take your first breath or spread those wings or whatever the metaphor is. But that it's kind of an incredibly beautiful state. And I, like you, like I think I always associated it with this more, yeah, like cramped and dark and not so good, whatever, like our minds are always dividing all this stuff into good and bad. And that's another thing I like to consciously try and move myself away from, or at least give myself space around.
Yeah. So part of my thesis about this notion of heroism is that by becoming more ourselves and understanding more of our own potential and being aligned with it and not afraid of it, the result is that we contribute even more to the people around us and contribute even more strongly, even more purely, because we're more aligned and we're more focused. So what is it going to look like for us, like the people who are around you or the people exposed to your art? Like, how is this going to affect your art, this process that you're engaged in?
I don't really know. I almost feel like anytime a question is, how is it gonna?
Yeah.
I kind of feel a little bit like I'm in the dark. I don't know.
Well, how would you like it to? Maybe is that?
I would always like for it to be received. I think there's no greater compliment, like literally the complimentary of the compliment of to creation, than to be received, to be welcomed, to be seen, to be heard. Like what we all desire deep down, we want to be seen, we want to be heard. And I think for the paintings or any of the creations, when they are seen and felt and heard and accepted, it's a blessing. It's just a blessing for myself to witness that, almost like, yeah, as if your child. I know it's a sort of cliche thing to say, but your art, it feels a bit like your children, as if you see your child go and have a beautiful interaction with someone that feels really great. And it can happen in so many ways. Like I had this really beautiful experience the other day because I sell my work in markets in the city, in New York City. And so I sell a lot of things that have kids in it. And it's very happy and it's cute and, joyful and all that stuff. And people, the often reactions are like the reception might be within that space of like, oh, that's so cute. That's great. And which I love. But then the other day, this girl walked up and she honed in on a painting, a little print of a painting on the table. And she picked it up, and I knew not to even talk to her. Like we were just sort of, because you're usually I'm there as the salesperson, but I was like, "Is that her?" And she just picked it up, and it was a painting of two people looking at each other. Like it wasn't maybe as cute as a lot of the other work, and she just stared at it, and then she started like breathing heavily, and she cried, and then of course I cried because I cry whenever somebody in front of me cries, basically, or often, let's say. And so this emotion just happened, and at some point we locked eyes and we smiled at each other, and she just kept looking at the painting and until she put it down and she put her hand on her heart and walked away. And I did the same. And it was such an intense and beautiful experience that for me, that will always stay with me, like, and there was no exchange of like, oh, you want my information or my card or like prices or whatever stuff, right? That comes with being someone who sells their work. It was just this incredible moment. And I have so many, because I've been doing this for 15 years in selling my own work in the streets and in the markets. And I have so many of these kinds of beautiful moments, that happen with people where I can feel like, well, that served its purpose, that,
Wow, that seems like it would be so important. I mean, if it were me, to give me the fuel, the emotional fuel to continue.
exactly. It feels very, very validating and great, again, like I don't want to be looking outward for that validation, but when something like that happens, it's like, yeah, it's like a really beautiful gift from the universe.
Wow, and so I imagine many artists are just selling entirely online. You could probably do that. Why have you chosen to go to markets? And I'd love actually to hear a little description of what these I'm imagining like a farmer's market. Is it that kind of thing with these like white tents or?
Exactly. It's like an arts and crafts scenario. Like there's 130 events. It's right behind the Museum of Natural History in the city. So it's kind of like this cool little area where they're out and about. It's very busy and a lot of makers, not so many painters per se, but some artists and a lot of, yeah, all kinds of things. Beautiful clothes, jewelry, pottery, some vintage stuff. Like it's a mix of makers, I would say, artisans, artists. Yeah, I chose that. Definitely. I was going to say it sort of happened, but like it back in the day, where like 15 years ago, I started doing that. And there, I was already online too, but that was never, this became my way to make a living. So I just stepped in there back in the day, and I went with a little table to the street, Union Square, and I brought my prints and my paintings. And I think that first day, I was there for a few hours. I was super nervous, but then I sold whatever it was, something like a couple of $100 worth of prints, and something between 150 and 200. And I was like, okay, if I do this 5 days a week, I can make a living. I can make it work.
I can pay my New York rent.
Yeah. But I'm a dreamer, so I was like, but I saw also these numbers kind of, like, okay, but I get more stuff out, I make it, better somehow. I saw the potential, and then kept at it, and then started doing more organized kind of street fairs, like the markets. And there's some big markets in the city that where you can rent a booth in the Christmas time. So I did that for a lot of years, and that was always like an amazing event to just show and sell my work. So I've been doing it for ages. And then other things as well, but like like online or other like books and commissions and other types of work, of course, but this is sort of the bedrock of it still. And it's like what I like about it so much actually is that interaction with people, like how it's received, like I can feel and see it, and talk about it and know what people like and what and why and how. And that can be a bit tricky too, because then you can let that influence what you paint next. And like we were talking about before, sometimes that happens. Like I definitely sometimes set out with this idea for like, oh yeah, well I know this works. I try not to just do that, obviously, and keep true to my own sort of muses, the stuff that I don't know, and what it's gonna do. But then it does these things, like the story I just told about that girl, like this having this deep connection to this one piece. And that piece was not a piece that I made with any kind of commercial success in mind. Like I was like, I'm just making this. Like I don't know, and that I hope I can always do that.
God, it's just such a funny realm of our modern life. So I just took this marketing course, which I know nothing about marketing, but I've got this podcast, and it's just like, hey, you should figure out how to market the podcast. And the marketing course is all about, you got to understand who's listening, kind of who's engaging with your art, what their needs are, where they are on their journey. This is like me doing being very charitable towards marketing. and the teacher of the course was great. I mean, he was like very authentically cared about people, right? It's just like, what are these people's needs? What is the journey they're on? And what role do you play in their journey? And that way you can like focus the content on actually serving these people that need you, they're coming to you. And that's how you plug into the economy. That's how you get paid for your work, all the rest of it. But it's so, that formula, which I think I'd be wise to follow it, but I don't know if I will. It seems wholly inappropriate for an artist, because then you end up just making the kind of plastic stuff that everybody wants and can pay for. Then it just immediately like sends you into mass market things that people think they need, but they don't really need.
Yeah. And I think, on the broad levels, like for everyone, artists, but like all of us in a way, like we have to honor that which comes from this, that I guess can call it sacred desire. What's the sacred desire behind it or within it? Like what's the drive, the reason, the purpose for the individual? And then those little like things around it, the marketing stuff, like, I mean, I deal with it too, like I definitely have to sometimes put that hat on.
Yeah, you're trying to pay your New York rent.
Yeah, not that I live outside of the city now, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. But like that was a big shift in my own life. Like 4 years ago, we moved. But yes, still though, it's still, you pay your upstate New York life, whatever. Like everyone has to deal with that. This monetary. Because, I mean, you also must come from a place like where the podcast, you do it from a place of wanting to connect or.
Yeah. There's a couple of, I mean, one, I had this coaching program that's related to the podcast. And so the idea is that like the audience of the coaching program, the audience of the podcast has some overlap. That's part of it. But the reason to do the podcast and not some other thing is that for me, talking to people, understanding more about people's lives is just part of my, you could say part of my spiritual path, but just part of like how it's the way in which I'm going to get to being the person I want to be. I want to be this person that's just full of love and without judgment. And the way to do that is to just encounter a whole lot of people and understand, when do I feel that love and when do I not? And when do I feel that judgment and when do I not? And be able to improve through that. But it is this funny, and I guess this whole conversation in a sense has been about balance and that yin and the yang that you brought up. And so as an artist trying to make your living as an artist, you both have to be guided by that inner light of like, what am I actually here to create in terms of what am I here to express and what is the beauty I want to birth? And then this other concept from my marketing class of like, what would speak to people? And it's almost like back in the day when there was maybe a patron of the arts, or I'm not familiar with that historical system, but maybe you could be a little freer of that. And maybe like some king is like, hey, I'm just going to pay you for 10 years to do anything.
Yeah.
That's not the system we live in.
No. But yeah, no, it's very, because even I'm thinking you said patron, and I love that website Patreon, like where you can, and there's some artists on there too, but you still have to be really business minded and thinking of like, what can I offer the patron? But I really do like that concept though, of like the modern patron model where people can chip in $5 a month for someone to do what they love to do. And then for that, but then you have to, as the creator, be very well aware of like, what do I then, give them for their loyalty, for their money. And I mean, putting finite number like money onto something like art or even like creative content, like a podcast conversations, anything like that, like it's so difficult. I find it's so difficult to know how to sort of trap it almost in a number, But then again, then this is sort of this business like thing, mindset can be helpful. And then it just does become about like, well, what would people like, And for me, it may be less so about the images itself and try to be a little bit more, lean towards the side more of what I was just saying, like just letting the creations bubble up more spontaneously, but then the presentation maybe, like there's other things that you have to do. And when you go to the market and like, how do I present it? And I have different ways that I sell prints, a couple of different sizes, a couple of different formats, a couple different like presentations. And I think that kind of stuff is helpful in my case. I don't know, but
yeah. So you're trying to balance the ways in which you're listening to yourself and you're listening to your audience.
Yeah. And the outside world always does influence and infuse your own experiences. Even the cocoon experience I was just talking about. I mentioned, I think briefly, that night I'd been in a little women's group that we hold regularly on the full moons, and I know that being there that night and speaking what I spoke and listening to what I listened to, sharing what we shared, contributed to me having that moment. Like, so I feel like there's always this beautiful interactive thing going on. Like it's never ever separate. So it's always at work.
Yeah, and I think for me the hope or the opportunity, and in my better moments I can really tune into this. It's not that like it's like, oh man, the economy, got to sell some shit, but it's really like, oh, this is a way I can connect with the lives of others. I can understand what their needs are, what their suffering is, and I can contribute to it through this dance of like the dance moves I have and the dance moves they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think not falling sort of into that skeptical or sort of like, space because God knows it's happened to me, many times when like selling certain things, and also realizing that when you sell, some things do really sell well and they become sort of your little hits, like about that a lot, like musicians having to play their hit song again and again and again, instead of maybe their brand new stuff that they are feeling is more relevant to them in that moment. Like that must be a thing to navigate, and that's something that I sometimes navigate in that in a small way, and with the art too. Like, oh yeah, these popular things will sort of roll on, well, whereas my newest or most sort of infused creation of that moment is doesn't get as much attention. But I also feel like I have to get out of my own way a lot with that stuff. Be like, oh gosh, whatever. Don't don't make yourself too important to this whole thing, and just step out of the way and let the art be art. And then, like, kind of, I find that's something I'm learning, to just sort of like not take myself so seriously, all the while taking, what I do and how I do it serious to enough to constantly be present with it.
Yeah.
But,
That's I think it's one of the keys to happiness is kind of pursuing excellence without taking ourselves seriously.
yeah, exactly. I feel like that's a big one. It's a big one for me, like to for most of us probably, but like I know that's been a one on my path where maybe 15, 20 years ago, I took myself a lot more seriously.
Ben, what are you you're talking about the newest thing that, like a musician will be like, oh, this is what I'm excited about right now. What is that for you right now? Like what are the creative projects bubbling through you that you're so
Well, one is actually a beautiful mixture of all these things, again, because it's a product, but it's an oracle deck that I made with a good friend of mine, and she wrote the whole thing, and it's inner child healing work. I provided all the art for it. So the art being 44 cards that we lined up with 44 topics that you can then read about in the booklet, and a very sort of entry level, I feel, playful way for people to enter into this kind of work.
But let's just imagine like let's say is it how does it work? Do I do it with someone
Well,
else?
you have these 44 cards, right?
Okay.
It's like a tarot kind of.
Okay.
Then you would pick a card. You would sort of have an intention, maybe there's something that's in your mind, in your heart, whatever. Like what about this thing? And then you can put that energy into it, or you could so you could pick a card or two or three, but let's say you pick one, and the card will have something, a painting on it and a subject.
It'll have a beautiful painting on it.
It will have a beautiful, colorful, like, yes. And even though we had to really search through my whole catalog to find some more, because some of the cards are trauma, abandonment. Those two are the ones coming to me right now. But like some darker kind of subjects.
Okay.
So we had to match them with images that would match that, and we did it. And there's definitely some stuff in my work. Again, this is not the stuff that most people see or that gets out. So it's kind of cool in that way also to be able to have some of that work see the light of day and serve a purpose.
Yeah. Okay. So the card has this artwork and then there's this one word on it?
Yeah, let's say it's abandonment. So there's an image for that sort of relates a little bit to that. Like, and that's where the viewer, you can look at this card and kind of sit with it for a moment, feel if anything comes up, what you see, what is there a trigger? Is it just like what's going on in your consciousness while you look at this card? Then you go to the booklet. The booklet has each card. So abandonment has a page, 3 pages, it's a small booklet with writing. This is my partner, Nina, who did that. And the writing will sort of talk a little bit about, so what is abandonment and how does this relate to inner child kind of work and consciousness. And then there's an invitation. So the invitation might be a very short little meditation or something, to an exercise to do with it and around it in order to open something up, to come a little closer to allowing it, to understanding it, to continue working with it maybe. Or so it's kind of like psychological self-help stuff that you can do in a very playful kind of home setting or with friends, or in a more serious setting. Like people do this, like people do oracle deck readings. Like, so yeah, that's the idea of it.
Sounds, I mean, yeah, if you're just going to hang out with a friend after a long time,
Yeah.
It might be an interesting thing to.
I did it with my nieces were visiting from Holland and they're 15 and we did it together and it was meaningful to do it. It was fun with another deck, like not my deck yet, but I had one here, something. And yeah, we picked a card and we read the whole thing and you do dive into a bit of a more sort of a deeper space.
It's like a real conversation and
Yeah.
connection, not just like,
Yeah.
oh, my train was late and how was the weather?
Exactly. Because then from that you can go deeper, or you can be like, oh, okay, well, I'll sit with that and that's it. Or some people might not speak to, but a lot of people will have something they can take from it, and then you can continue the conversation if you like too. So that's a product. So that came about very organically and beautifully with this co-creator Nina a year and a half ago, and now it's here, and so that's really cool. Inner Child and Beyond, it's called. So I'm very excited about that. So, and these little animation videos that I'm making for little talks by people that I find have something really interesting to say. So I'll take like 3, 4, 5 minutes and illustrate and animate the talk. So I'm excited about that. And always the newest painting seems to be where I'm. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So one of the things I always like to do, although often I forget, is ask people for a hero and a challenge or an invitation for the listeners. So would you describe a hero of yours that comes to mind?
Well, I don't have one hero, but so when I was thinking about the hero theme as of the podcast and conversation, this song came to my mind, and it was John Lennon's song, and it's a working class hero. Do you know that song? So I started humming that, and I was like, a working class hero is something to be. And I feel like when I think of hero or heroic or heroism, I feel like less than naming an individual. I feel like so many people are doing it, so many people are just doing it, raising kids, going to work, loving their people around them, doing the best they can. And it's so much, like it's so challenging to do all those things day to day well, and again and again and again. And so I feel like that's where I want to put that unsung heroes of everyday life, if you're like just parents, just people who work 3 jobs to make ends meet and who are doing it who are smiling and who are loving and who are kind. Like that takes, to me, that's it.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I have such strong memories of listening to that song when I first discovered it in high school, and so impactful, so much of his work. But yeah, that song particularly.
And no, it's very deep and meaningful.
Yeah. And what about a challenge or an invitation for our listeners?
Well, maybe sort of tying into the last couple of videos that I made, who both these people speak, and that's this kind of relates back to inner child work as well. To whenever you feel whatever feeling comes up around anything, to sort of make a little game with yourself or deal with yourself that for a whole day, like every time any feeling comes up, to stop and kind of go, oh, just I'm feeling this. I am the one feeling it. So to own that feeling, not to just like bounce it right back to, but he said that, or whatever, and to take it and go, what is it in myself that, no, not even to start analyzing, but just to go, I am feeling it. It's my feeling comes up in me, and just even notice that. And then the next step or layer to be, if there's an irritation with someone or something, and you feel this thing, to kind of first own that it's yours, and secondly, maybe find in yourself where that lives in you, like what in you does that thing that you get so annoyed by, or that you get sad over, or what in you is that part, sort of to start to learn to identify all the different parts of yourself.
So that's quite challenging. That's a real challenge. Because the first step of just stopping when you have a feeling and being like, oh, I have a feeling, that in itself is a pretty big challenge.
I mean, it is. It is. That's why I should stop myself there, because I'm getting too confusing and too like,
No, I mean, we're going to end up enlightened if we follow your advice. But
rambling on. But like, just even to like sort of do that, right? Like, that's huge. Like, even for me, like in my day, like to be like, oh, there it is. I got some reaction, from something. My kid did, my husband did, the bus driver did, whatever. Like anything, like can do that. Thoughts about something somebody did a week ago. Like I could still, get reaction. So, and just to even like stop and go, it's my thing. Like just even to sort of name it, right? First and see it. Yeah. Yeah.
wow, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing so candidly, for being on the show. This is every one of these conversations is different, but I just love just the openness you brought here and like the transparency, the lack of fortification that you brought to this conversation.
Well, thank you. That's yours as well. Thank you for, being that open with me and yeah, making that easy.
Fantastic. Oh, it's just so great to reconnect with you. I love it. That was great. Do you do this? Have you done this? I think you said maybe you haven't done this before. Is that right?
I did it once or twice.
Mm.
Yeah.
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 Cool.
Talk a
Well,
lot.
no, it's great. Another thing I wanted to ask you about as we talk about the difference between being guided internally and kind of following along the needs or the desires of others is you recently went on a media fast. And I don't know how many of my listeners are familiar with that or have done that recently. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about that. What that is and what was your experience?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's an official term. I mean, we just sort of call it that. My partner and I went on it together, and we brought our daughter along as well. For most part, who's turning 8 this week. Well, so for 3 weeks, 21 days, we decided to not take in any media. So no screens, no books, no podcasts, no music, no nothing. And work, if I have to do emails, I have to do if I was doing this in the middle of it, obviously I would do it. Like the screens are part of my life and I'm okay with that. Just to be clear on that. And conversations, phone, or even texting, stuff like that was all allowed, but like no input. Like so no kind of information or entertainment, like just for 3 weeks just to see, feel what comes up. Like what does that do? Like what does that allow for? What does that open up? What does that bring up? And it's really hard. It's really, really hard. It's the impulse to go to your phone, the impulse to go to the screen all the time is so embedded in my system. I notice that, like, I mean, that's one of the first things, I notice, like, okay, anytime I'm sitting, like in the morning, I make coffee, I sit, and I sort of like, okay, go to my phone. Like, and then if there's no interesting messages, then I'll be like, oh, I'll go to Instagram or go to YouTube or go to, and that to really just be like, no, none of that. It's been incredibly challenging and it's been incredibly enriching. And I mean it in a way of not just like, oh, it's some kind of rosy, blissful thing. Not at all. Like I think that everything that I kind of felt it deeper. So even if I think those were actually some of the most interesting bits about it for me is like that, throughout 3 weeks, I get periods when I'm like naturally a bit more low or sad or whatever, not feeling so good in my own space or skin and then those moments I realized like not being able to then go numb it, basically with a movie or even a book, like could be really good
There's no distraction from your experience of life.
No distraction. You have to be incredibly present with what is, and that is hard and worth it. because you do come to realize that, or I did. So being said, okay, so maybe I cry, maybe I am in that space for a little bit. And then maybe, it lasts for, I don't know, 2 minutes, maybe it lasts for 20. I don't know. It could last longer, but it will subside. And I think that's what was great. Like it showed me that the natural coming and going and ebbing and flowing. And so there is that I found really beautiful and fascinating in it. And that I could sort of tie it back to some of the other things we talked about, like that the thoughts and ideas or feelings that I do have, like I started to feel a bit more ownership of them or a bit more confidence around them. Like, okay, this is something I think, because it's not something I've heard someone say, even though obviously, influences are great. And I'm going to keep reading books and watching great films and listening to great podcasts as I move on. But to sort of limit that a little bit, like with maybe normal food, like it's also very helpful because it sort of lets me know a bit more, how do I feel? What do I think? What do I want? So yeah.
You get a sense of what the baseline is before you add in all this other stuff.
Yes. Like in music. Yeah. To hear the bass line is, yeah.
And then I also wanted to ask, for people who are listening and interested in your work, obviously they can't see it on the podcast. How can they see it, or how can they get in touch with you?
Well, my website is edieart, EDIE art.com. And that's the sort of hub, so that everything will be from there. But on social media, I'm always Edie Art as well, in different places. But the website, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Edie.
Yeah, thank you, Ankur. It was so good.
That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. Thanks again for listening, and I hope that this has contributed in some small way to your own personal journey of heroism. I'd like to give a shout out to Pierre for the episode artwork, DJ Plainview for the theme music, and to our producer-editor, Martine. This podcast is sponsored by Momentum Lab, our year-long coaching program providing insight, accountability, a community of excellence, and one-on-one support. I encourage anyone who's intrigued to go to whatismomentumlab.com and explore. Finally, I love communication. If this episode has impacted your life in any way, let me know. Our email is info@10kh.show, and there's other ways to contact us in the show notes. Thank you, have a wonderful day, and take care.